Do you know how to use a theory of change? This video is going to be all about that. My name is Michelle Molina. I'm from Connecting Evidence, and I help organizations all the time get from developing a theory of change to actually getting the data that's useful for them to make improvements, make decisions, and hopefully show how successful their work is to others. So that's what this video is going to be all about. And if you like content like this, content that should help nonprofits, coalitions, and social innovators learn how to use data and improve their evaluation capacity, make sure to subscribe. The first step is to develop a theory of change. So in order to use a theory of change, you have to first make one. A theory of change, for a little bit of background, is some sort of documentation that describes how the things you do or your activities lead to the changes you want to see, that is, your outcomes. I recently made a video describing all the steps, so feel free to check that out. And I'll also put a link in the description below for you to find that video easily. The next step is to highlight outcomes that are particularly important. You can do this in a number of ways. I basically recommend going through a list of questions that I have outlined for you in my guide to developing a theory of change, and I'll tell you how to download that later. But I'll pull out some questions that I think are particularly important. The first question I want to pull out is I want you to look at your theory of change and consider 3 outcomes that are particularly important. If you could only achieve 3 outcomes, which 3 outcomes would you pick? Another question to consider is which of these outcomes are particularly aligned with your organization's mission? And finally, the last question I'll share with you is to look at your theory of change and consider upcoming decisions and whether or not there are any outcomes that would help make that decision-making process easier. So again, I have more questions for you to check out, and I'll tell you how to get the workbook later. So now that you have identified outcomes that are key to the work you do, that is key outcomes, I want you to look at this list of outcomes and focus in on your short-term outcomes. Now, short-term outcomes are the sorts of changes you would expect would happen when someone walks away from your activity. That is the thing you're doing. Whether it's a program, event, initiative, when somebody walks away, what sort of change do you expect to have them to have experienced? Focusing on short-term outcomes allows you to collect data now. It helps you understand whether or not something is on the right track and allows you insights on how to make improvements. So, for example, I work with an organization called Bright Beginnings. It's a coalition, and they are helping to sponsor a number of different services aimed at helping children in their community be ready for kindergarten. So our ultimate goal and our very most important outcome is kindergarten readiness. However, a lot of the things we're doing are going to impact changes or have an effect right now that we hope will ultimately lead to kindergarten readiness. For example, one of these activities are playgroups. Playgroups are reoccurring events where families, parents, or caregivers can bring their children or the children they care for and learn a number of concepts through play. So they're learning about early childhood development, the sorts of activities they can do at home to foster child development, and the importance of play, and a number of other important early childhood development concepts. Our theory of change here is that if we help caregivers learn these early childhood development concepts, they will be better able to provide quality care to the children they're responsible for. And if these children have access to quality care early on, they will ultimately have the tools and resources they need in order to be prepared for kindergarten. Instead of collecting data on whether or not these children are ready for kindergarten now, we're collecting data on the caregiver's knowledge of early childhood development concepts. because kindergarten readiness is the sort of change that is probably going to take years to happen. We're having playgroups with caregivers that bring 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, where instead of waiting to see whether or not in 5 years they're ready for kindergarten, or in a year or two they're ready for kindergarten, we're collecting data now so we can understand whether or not we're on the right track now, and if there are any improvements we can make to our programming and our activities. So for this step, what I want you to do is either focus in on your short-term outcomes, or if you're really interested in achieving a very lofty goal, I want you to consider what sort of indicators, what are the short-term changes that you would expect to see if you were on the right track to that long-term outcome. Now you have developed a theory of change, identified key outcomes within that theory of change, and narrowed down those key outcomes to short-term outcomes. So at this point, you should have a running list of outcomes you would be interested in collecting data on. What I want you to do for step 4 is to go through the list and consider which of those outcomes would actually give you useful data. So when I'm talking about useful data, there are 4 very broad uses for data. One is to help you make improvements, to help you make decisions, 4th, to help you show you're successful at achieving your outcomes. So this one helps you understand the extent to which you are achieving those outcomes. And 4th is data that will help you make the case for your programs or initiatives or services. So this is the sort of data that will help you point out a need. So what I want you to go do is to go through your list of outcomes you're considering collecting data on and identify which would be the most useful for you to collect data on now. The more urgent that, or the more close to actually being useful a data source is, the more you should prioritize it. So go down the list of outcomes you're considering collecting data on and identify which would be the most useful for you in the next 6 months or in the next year. That's what you should be collecting data on now. Once you have identified which outcomes you want to move forward with, you have to make sure that the outcomes are clearly defined. You want to do 3 things. You want to ask stakeholders about what they think various concepts mean, so what various outcomes mean, and make sure that you are all on the same page as to what you're going to move forward with, so what definition you're going to be using. You can also do 2 other things. You can reach out to experts in those various concepts and ask them if you're defining things properly and if there's anything else they might add to your definition or take away from that definition. And a 3rd thing you can do is go out and explore the literature in those topics to see how other people are talking about those concepts and to get ideas as to how you want to move forward with describing the concepts within your context as well. So talk to stakeholders, reach out to experts, and explore the literature. So now that you have clearly defined what you want to measure, it's time for you to consider the different data collection options you have. Generally speaking, there are 5 different data collection methods. You have observations, surveys, focus groups, interviews, and document analysis. Let me know if you're interested in diving deeper into any of those different types of data collection methods in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about surveys, I've done a video for you to check out once you're done with this video, so you can learn more about surveys as a data collection method. Generally speaking, in this step, what I'm asking you to do is to consider your context and the outcomes you want to measure and identify what would be the most appropriate way for you to collect data given those 2 things. I recommend doing this in 3 steps. 1, I recommend you consider what your stakeholders, find credible. So think about the people who are going to be using the data and what sort of data are they going to be willing to use or more likely to use. Some people, for example, they love numbers, so they prefer quantitative data. Other people like qualitative data, and yet others like a mix of both. So consider what sort of data your stakeholders are going to find credible. Another thing you should also do is explore the literature and see how other people are collecting data related to the concepts you're interested in measuring. Are they using surveys? Are they using focus groups? What sort of tools are they using? And finally, you want to look at your naturally occurring data collection opportunities. So what time points do you have available to you to easily collect data? And what would be the most appropriate data collection tools or data collection methods to use during those time points? For example, if we go back to the playgroups, we have these playgroups occur, there are events. That's a really natural place for us to go and talk to caregivers and ask them a few questions and have them fill out a survey or maybe do a focus group after the playgroup itself. So consider those naturally occurring data collection options you have at hand. So again, stakeholders, consider their biases, consider the different options you have, how other people have collected data on this outcome, and the opportunities you have at hand. Now that you have explored your various options, it's time to move forward and actually develop your data collection tool and your data collection protocols. So this can be a video in and of itself, but I'll share some of the main touch points you want to go through here. First, you want to develop a draft tool. Then you want to share it with stakeholders and ask them for feedback, particularly the stakeholders that are going to be using the data that you collect. Ask them for feedback, ask them for what they think you can do to improve the tool, and move forward with their feedback. And finally, the last thing you want to do is do a test run. So go out and collect a little bit of data so that you can catch any potential issues before you go out and fully implement your data collection plan. Draft your tool, share it with stakeholders, do a practice run, and make improvements to your data collection tools and protocols. Once you're done identifying your data collection tools and testing them, it's time for step 8 to move forward and actually collect your data and analyze it. I won't get into the details here because it really depends on your data collection method. It really depends on your overall evaluation plan, and those things are very context oriented, but let me know if you're interested in diving deeper around how to collect data and different data analysis methods. So for step 8, what you want to do is collect your data and analyze it. Step 9 is, I would say, one of the most important steps you can take, and it's to share your data. I can't tell you how many organizations I've run into that have a lot of data at their disposal, but it's in an Excel sheet that nobody looks at. So therefore, nobody is actually using the data, and data is very resource intensive, so you want to make sure you use it. What I recommend in terms of sharing your data is to host a data party. So another word for data party is sense making session, and I'm planning to do a video on this very topic alone. So let me know if you're interested by subscribing so you don't miss that video. Generally in a data party, you have stakeholders come and look at the data for themselves and make sense of it. So they consider what the data is telling them, and then they consider what the implications would be in terms of what next steps they should take based on what the data is telling them. So by this point, we've developed our theory of change, identified the outcomes we want to move forward with collecting data on. We've collected the data analyzed it and shared it with stakeholders, made sense of it, identified next steps. It's time for us to not just move on, but it's time to circle back and review your theory of change. You want to go back and look at your theory of change and consider if you need to make any revisions given the new evidence you have just collected. Now I've walked you through all the steps you need to take between developing a theory of change and getting useful data. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, I encourage you to join my mailing list so that you can download the guide to developing a theory of change and get started on your journey to actually getting useful data. If you join my mailing list, I also send out almost weekly emails called Find Funds Friday, and I sent out different grant opportunities that I think people might be interested in. If you like this video, let me know by liking it and commenting below and subscribing. That's how I evaluate whether or not these videos are useful to people out there. I really want to hear how you have used your theory of change. So getting useful data or identifying and prioritizing outcomes and figuring out what sort of data would be useful to collect is only one way to use a theory of change. I recently talked to somebody who I helped make a theory of change in the past, and they shared with me that they use their theory of change a lot of the times to onboard new staff members and get them up to speed in terms of what they're working towards and what their programs and activities are all about. So I would love to hear in the comments below how you have used the theory of change or how you plan to use your theory of change in the future. And I don't want you to miss out on any of the videos I do, so I encourage you to check out the video I made on how to develop a theory of change. I've also made videos in the past on how to develop a logic model and how to do a stakeholder analysis, so I encourage you to go look at those.